Hello everyone and welcome back to the Skyrim audio adventure. I might sound a little bit different today because I'm standing inside of this audio booth that I got using the Patreon money. So it's pretty cool, but I'm also using a different mic. It's the one that fits into my mic stand. The other mic stand was more of a desktop affair. I'd have to hold it in my hand if I wanted to record on it in this setup. This one fits into the stand. I don't know if it's better or worse. And I don't know if I'll be able to tell because I haven't recorded the other mic in here because I don't want to read an audiobook like I'm a lounge singer. I might go back to my old mic if I get a stand for it or whatever the case is. But point is that I've got new equipment and I spent your Patreon money to do it. And I'm also rolling that Patreon money over to the voice talent that I employ for these episodes. So thank you guys so much. Without further ado, let's get right into Chapter 2 of Season 2 of the Skyrim audio adventure. On Darker Paths. Beneath the gentle morning light, in a cozy hut on the outskirts of Riverwood, a young Nord slung his bow and checked his quiver. Seeing his 16 arrows nestled nicely in the leather, he reached for his pack.
"Did you remember your hatchet?"
asked his mother.
"Yeah, I've got it here,"
the young Nord said after a moment's checking.
"And your water?"
"On my hip."
"And your map?"
"In my pack."
"And your..."
"Mother, I'm ready."
The eyes of the formidable Nord woman softened under her adventurous mane of redwood brown hair. She wiped her hands on her apron as she stepped away from her workbench and clasped her boy by the face. Pursing her lips, she ran a thumb over the jagged two-pronged scar under his right eye. She saw then, as if time had folded in on itself, his little screaming face, his tears running red down the bulging veins in his neck, the other side of his face black with mud. Her heart sank at the memory, and she breathed deep to steady herself.
Aye, of course you are.
She brushed some hair off his forehead before examining the threads with interest.
You'll be ready for anything if your aim is as straight as your looks. Strange that. I was always waiting for your head to get all twisted like mine.
She let go of the hair and popped him on the nose with her pointer finger.
But no, you're your father's son, ain't ya?
So is Valham.
Oh, he is. But between the two of you, there's no point in comparing. Why, when he was your age, he had a cowlick so big, you'd have thought a crescent moon was perched on his head. And a bad for that Camilla girl, too.
Really?
Oh, yes. Just stay safe today and I'll give you all his old secrets and misadventures.
As he looked up at her wild hair a dark halo of loose curls, she looked like some old etching of Meridia and her bright crown.
I'll be good at this, Mom. It's just like when I bring home pets, only this time I'll bring home supper. A big pheasant, or even a huge deer with 12 points.
I'm not the one who needs convincing.
Who does need convincing?
Obviously, it's that 12-point book of yours,
she said sarcastically.
You might be in for quite the debate. So you better jump on it. Supper awaits.
Oh, right.
The boy snapped to action and ran to the door.
See you later, Mom.
See you, love.
A bright Riverwood morning greeted the boy on the other side of the door. In the future, he'd need to get out earlier, but this being his first hunt, he felt no guilt easing into it. Or at least that's what he told himself. In truth, he was so restless the previous night, he wasn't asleep till the moons were on their way down. The sounds of a busy Riverwood reached him easily as he descended the steps of their modest porch, ready to strike out into life and manhood. Suddenly, as his foot came down on the last step, A hand shot out and grabbed him by the ankle. The boy let out a shrill squeal, both at the shock of the ambush and at losing all balance in an instant. Like a startled fawn, he tried to leap and kick, but the attempt only made his ensuing fall all the more dramatic. With a stumble, a tumble, and an ill-fated tuck, he crashed into the dirt, limbs an awkward tangle.
McCalla?
He called in frustration. The only response he got was a high cackle and scrabbling sound as his little sister made her retreat. He sheepishly scanned the doors and windows of this little corner of town. Luckily, no one had seen save the goat in the neighbor's yard. Meeting its odd rectangular eyes, he pointed to it.
Not a word, Bessie.
He hissed.
Not one bleat.
The goat chewed thoughtfully in a way that, if taken generously, could be construed as assent.
Good girl.
Brushing himself off, he stood and checked his gear. Nothing needed mending. Checking his surroundings again, he jumped, kicked, and sunk into a fighting stance, proof to the world and himself that he wasn't entirely uncoordinated. Once satisfied, he set out into manhood once more. For real this time. The whisper of the river grew alongside the grinding of gears at the lumber mill. When the boy at last stepped onto the main road, the rattle and clatter of the mill was a considerable din, but to any who grew up in Riverwood, it was as relaxing a sound as the babbling of the White River itself. The mill sat on an island that split the river. The gnawing teeth of the water would have ate away at this embankment with time, but the strong roots of the trees that called this island home kept it stable even years after the building of the mill. From where he stood, the boy could see the mill workers moving in musical rhythm over the structure, each filling a specific role. He could see Hod and Girder setting the pace, Sinding checking for rot, Faendal and the tall Valham moving the cuts. He could see his brother's wavy blonde hair tied back in a tail. He had wanted to braid it like their father, but it had come out ratty and tangled. He saw their father then, helping Hod and several others hoist a tree into the saw line. A mighty Nord man, blessed with a daughter and 2 sons. How joyful he had been when the second was born under the sign of the warrior. But time revealed the boy to be of slight build and mild temperament. Not today, though. Today, he would live up to his sign. Today, he would put food on his family's table. He remembered the delicious boar that had been roasting on a spit in the sleeping giant more than a month ago. He remembered the grateful looks cast at the half-breed hunter who had brought it in. What had been his name?
Nufic,
Came a voice behind him. He turned to see Galia waving at him from under the eaves of the general store. The young girl wore a bright green dress the color of the forest dawn, and seemed as unshakable as a mountain. She was, to him, like a thing eternal, fixed in his mind. She jogged up, slinging a basket over her shoulder. Her dancing hair was light brown with curious encroachments of blonde and red as the morning sun caught it. Her face was wide and kindly, far from the classic angular look of a daughter of Skyrim, but all the same Nufic found himself fighting that hot rush in his face as she approached.
you look like you're going somewhere.
I'm going hunting.
He managed to say. She stood about a head taller than him, sun glow ringing her features.
Really?
Yeah.
Without your mother?
Yep, I'm going it alone.
Fantastic. So the day's finally come.
She rested a hand on her hip as she looked him up and down.
And you're already covered in dirt.
It's camouflage.
He interjected. It wasn't a lie. If it weren't for the dirt, he bet she'd easily detect the color rising in his ears. He was suddenly extremely grateful for his imp of a little sister.
What did you get at the store?
Oh, I just picked up some antlers, cord, and some wildflower seeds from down south. Also, I dropped by the courier's post to order some wheat stalks from Pelagia Farm.
Is the grass low already?
No, we just wanted to give it a rest. Sophie's been a hungry girl, probably the nip from that storm last week.
How are the bees doing?
They're fine. In fact, we got a note from Honningbrew Meadery offering to buy any honey we can spare.
Sounds like a good opportunity.
It's a bit strange, actually. Father says they haven't done that since they were getting started a few years ago. You'd think a meadery would have its own hives, but I guess they were shipping it in from somewhere else.
Seems a waste. We're less than a day from Honningbrew.
Yeah, but I'm sure we don't actually have enough hives for what they need. Anyway, where are you off to?
Hunting, like I said.
Galia gave Nufic a less than amused smirk.
By the skies. Yes, I know, but where? Are you going up to the Eastern Heights or south towards Alta?
I was actually going to head out on the west side, sort of wind my way out towards Hag's End.
The girl faltered and looked down at him concerned.
Where Gloston slew the beast of Bleak Falls?
Indeed. Hallowed ground, wouldn't you say?
Hallowed? More like haunted. Hardly anyone goes out there, and didn't your parents tell you about that investigation? Apparently, folks have been going missing in those woods for years. They found all those bodies when they raided that hag's place.
True, but Gloston slew the beast and the hag. It's safe now. And since no one goes there, I bet there's good game to be had.
Galia shifted her weight nervously.
I don't know. What if there's just more badness out there?
I'll be safe. I can always hide. You've seen me.
Fine, but get back before dark. And take this.
Unslinging her basket, she produced a leather band ringed with beads.
A necklace?
Nufic said, puzzled.
Yeah, I saw it in the general store and it reminded me of you. I was gonna give it to you after you brought home your first hunt.
Galia's fingers wrung the lace bashfully.
But maybe if I give it to you now, it'll keep you safe.
Stunned, the boy took in the band. Weighing down the hanging end were several boar's teeth around a single tusk, the base carved crudely into the face of a wolf.
How much was this?
Doesn't matter. Here, put your head down.
Never one to refuse her, Nufic bowed and accepted the necklace. As much as he hated to admit it, he felt immediately more secure. Not for any esoteric protection offered by the talisman, but for the attention of the lass before him. When he rose his eyes to hers, there was color in her face.
Thank you.
He stammered out.
I'll bring you back something nice.
She smiled down at him before tucking a lock of hair behind her ear.
Like I said, just get yourself back before dark.
Nufic checked his gear and smiled, ready for his journey.
I'll try, but no promises. I might be carrying something big.
While the guard Aela had spoken to was making a valiant attempt at discretion, the rider who brought word from Pale Watch had lacked for subtlety upon arrival. He'd called out the message to the guards at the gates, and as the Jarl and his men were deliberating in Dragon's Reach, the shadowy news wafting up from Loria's farm percolated through the city of Whiterun like the stink of death itself. Many details were absent, then speculated, then exaggerated and spread as gospel. Parents coddled their children in affection born of anxiety. Chins were stroked in market corners and on garden benches. Smiles throughout the tiered city became strained, and the conversations hushed. All save for the noble houses of the Wind District, who wore deliberately somber expressions, no doubt to hide their ambitious excitement at the prospect of such a valuable patch of land becoming available. Jarl Bulgruf had motioned for Pale Watch to send a company of guardsmen at once to secure and investigate. He was promptly reminded by his advisors that sending a large showing of crown forces to an area near the border with the Pale was likely to cause friction with the throne of Dawnstar, a staunch supporter of the Stormcloak Rebellion. Bulgruf would be advised to send a smaller, more measured response, or simply defer to the judgment of the soldiers at Pale Watch, or perhaps to enlist the help of a group who could move without such political implications. A group like the honored companions of Jorvaskr. Aela did not know what the Jarl would eventually decide. She did not see the coddled children, hear the hushed conversations, or smell the stench of worry. All of this lived purely in her mind's eye, for she was already riding north, away from the city. The moment she'd heard the news, she'd informed the hall, threw on her huntress armor, gathered some supplies, rounded up whoever seemed ready, and made for the stables. Now she was thundering across the land on her mare Pebble, flanked by the tall, imposing Farkus, the young, eager Rhea, and the barrel-shaped but agile Hamel. Astride those proud steeds that roared on Whiterun's every flag, the group took the rolling tundra under hoof, grass tossing like waves of molten gold in the sinking sun. North of Whiterun Hold, the warmth of Akatosh strains to reach the land. Winters are long, days are cold, mountains are cruel, and the people are hardy. This oft snow-covered land is called the Pale. It is ruled, in name at least, by the Jarl of the port city of Starr, far north on the Sea of Ghosts. However, when one walks in that chill, steps under those sharp boughs, is knocked down by those frigid winds, or chased out of shelter by those wicked beasts, it is difficult to say that this land is ruled by anyone. The stubborn fortresses of rock and stone have not conquered the Pale. They exist in hollow defiance of it, a long defeat, for with time the white cold will sing sleep to every home, every hearth, and every heart. The view of those white vistas and jagged peaks was the daily companion of the town of Palewatch. Once the outpost sported an impressive wall in the days when the Jarls warred. Time and men tore it down until it was little more than a watchtower. Then, seeing as men get cold, hungry, and lonely, the camp slowly grew to a commune, and this purple evening the companions found themselves rumbling into a quaint hamlet. Colorful flags flapped in the brisk northern wind that howled like the ghosts of the sea. Even now, beyond sight, Aela's nose picked up the faintest hint of brine on the air. The riders trotted through the buildings, eyes peeled for golden sashes. They passed a smithy, a woodworker, a dairy, and several market stalls. It was the Jarl's city in miniature. A boy led a goat across their path as they rounded the corner of a modest bakery and came at last to the soldiers' outpost. A camp of huts and tents surrounding a solitary watchtower built on a modest bluff. As they approached, a guard stepped out and waved them down. "Hold!" came the voice over the wind, and the companions reined in their steeds and came up just short of running the speaker over. He was an athletic young Nord with dark hair and a boyish face. Hair blown back by the breath of Aela's horse, he smiled and patted the mare's neck before turning his attention to the rider. "I think it's best you find a place to sleep in town. There's trouble on the North Road." Hamel huffed under his cloak as if shrugging off the warning.
"Is that a decree?"
he asked. Aela smiled to herself as Farkus shot a look back at the husky man. The guard switched his weight onto his back foot, licking his lips impatiently. "It's a strong recommendation, outsider. If you knew what waited, you'd leave it till morning."
"We know what waits,"
Aela said, tossing her cloak back over her shoulder as Farkus did the same.
"We've come from Whiterun."
The guard's eyes widened at the sight of their armor. The huntress wore form-fitting leathers under a mantle of fur and steel. Over her flexible trousers, her thighs were protected by a padded skirt of leather and mail under steel plates embossed with an old Nordic icon derived from the characters for swift and wind. Farkus wore an impressive set of steel armor. It was heavy around the chest and shoulders, and ringed by a stripped armored skirt. A wolf's head molded of steel roared out at the world from under the tall man's collar. The pair struck a distinctive figure, one well known to the people of the Hold. If that wasn't enough, on both their armored shoulders was etched the iconic double-bladed axe, Wuthrad, the weapon of Ysgramor. "Hail, companions!" The guard bowed. "By Talos, I'm glad they sent you. The captain only took 2 with him, you see. Something about tensions with Dawnstar. Wanted to wait for the order to move more men."
"Where is your captain?"
"At the farm, Madam Huntress. But you'll never make it before nightfall. There's no stars tonight, and—" The young man was cut off by the thundering of hooves as the companions took off, spurring their horses on into the gathering dark. Nufic slumped down on a mossy log, almost slipping off in his uncoordinated exhaustion. His breaths were haggard, and he tasted metal from the exertion. "Hubris," he thought to himself, That was all this day had been. He'd hardly crossed the river when he had a terrific shot at a plump pigeon. Why hadn't he taken it? Because he didn't want his first hunt to end on a stinking pigeon. No, he was a man, and men hunted big game. Game like the rabbit that dove into its warren at noon, the fox that left a track for him to find an hour later, the marten that nearly knocked a limb onto his head 2 hours after that, or the thrush that had flitted overhead as the sun was getting low. He had nothing to show for his day, and now he'd climbed high into the foothills of the mountains, some gambler's instinct assuring him that these more treacherous paths barred the way to ever more bountiful hunting grounds. Now he was amid the most invisible of the seldom-used treks in this forest. The trees had thinned with the height, and from where he sat, spent from his climb, he perceived a troubling dimming of the already darkening sky. Some wicked wind had blown a thin layer of clouds overhead. Smooth and placid, the clouds bore no teeth, no menace of lightning or rain, but to young Nufic they set his bones a-quiver. He would have to navigate home in the dark forest with not even the lights of the night sky to aid him. He stood wincing at the soreness in his legs and the coolness on his skin. He had gone and sweated himself damp, and now his hunting clothes clung to him with an icy slickness that could only spell disaster on a Skyrim night. He pulled out his map and checked it, memorizing as many details as he could. This was likely the last look he'd have at it, before it was too dark to read. He was kicking himself as he set out. He could have crossed the bridge to the west bank, turned around, and immediately gone home, and it would have been a more successful day than today. Aela and Farkus urged their horses through the night. The two wolves had no difficulty stepping through the gloom, but Rhea and Hamel had to operate on trust, not just in the senior members, but in their steeds. Horses can see better than men in the dark, but they often grow skittish at all the things they perceive that their riders are blind to. Rhea gave a frustrated grunt as her horse faltered for no apparent reason. The wolves, however, didn't need to wonder. The sky was overcast, the lanterns of the moons and stars far away, but in that deep dark, the air was heavy with the scent of blood. They had reached the outskirts of the farm. Aela brought Pebble to a halt and dismounted, the group following suit.
We should light a couple of torches. We don't want to surprise them. In fact, let them surprise us.
So it was that the group led the horses by rein as they made their final approach to the cluster of buildings. A field fence shivered in the cool night-born breeze. It quaked ominously, as if it held some bloody memory of what had happened the previous night. The group had just passed the barn when the road dipped, wedging itself between a hillock of wheat clusters and the path to the house. Then, as if on cue, a call rang out from up in the wheat.
"Halt! In the name of the Whiterun Guard!"
Aela stopped and raised her head towards the hillock.
Captain!
She answered.
Is that you? We've come to help.
A wind tossed the wheat tips, and 3 heads popped up in the flurry. They darted into the light, and the companions had a first-hand demonstration of just how practical the wheat gold sashes of the guardsmen were. Blending out of the hill was a stocky imperial man. His ruddy brown eyes surveyed them easily under a short black head of hair. He brushed his palms together, spouting a geyser of dust into the glow of the torches. The buckle on his sash bore the design of 2 horse heads facing each other, their necks bent in an ornate heart, the insignia of a captain. To his right emerged a long-haired Nord with braids running back from his temples, and to his left an orcish man whose brows were lined with horns.
"Help, huh?"
grunted the Nord. Aela recognized his as the voice that called out.
"You from Whiterun?"
"They don't look like any guards I've seen,"
said the orc.
With respect, neither do you.
Hamel countered, earning him an elbow from Rhea. Finally, the man with the insignia spoke in a soft voice that hardly sounded capable of a yell. Yet, still carried a quiet weight. Clover? Rugat? Are you too drunk? The orc balked.
No, sir. You've been with us the whole time.
I ask because any child with eyes could recognize that these are no mere travelers. These are the companions of Jorvaskr. He smiled, dipping his head. Hail. Aela returned the gesture.
Hail! Captain...
Brew. I'm Brew. This is Clover and Rugat. And you are the Wolf of Whiterun herself, I presume.
Aela the Huntress, in the flesh. This is, Farkus, Rhea, and Hamel.
Aela pointed to each in turn. Farkus. The captain took in the tall Nord. Of the Iron-Blooded Brothers. Jurgen's boys.
Yep.
Farkus nodded.
Your name's Brew. Like an ale?
The captain gave a cockeyed nod. Yes, but it's spelled different.
Sounds confusing.
To some, perhaps. Welcome to Loria's farm.
Glad to be here.
Aela nodded.
Wish it was under fairer skies.
It's a grim time indeed. Did the Jarl send you?
No, but he was probably going to. Once we heard the news, we came as soon as we could. Your reinforcements may yet be on the way, but alas, we carry no word.
Captain Brew's smile didn't reach his baggy eyes. The man looked as if the last 24 hours had taken years off his life. That message was for the Jarl's ears alone. We were hoping to avoid a panic.
I'm sure your man was nothing if not discreet. But your Vosker does have ears all through the hold, even in the Cloud District. I hope that doesn't bother you.
Ears in the Cloud District, and yet you missed the Jarl's word.
We thought it best to act decisively.
Fair enough. Tell me this at least. Did you happen to see a cart on your way? Or pass anyone on the road? Aela shook her head.
Not since Pale Watch. There were a few carts and carriages on the road from Whiterun, but we've been alone in the dark for the last couple of hours.
Did you get a good look at any of the carriages?
Not really.
Rhea raised a hand.
Farkus saw a man with a funny hat.
Right.
Aela nodded.
There was the guy with the hat. When was that?
A few hours after we left.
Farkus rumbled.
Are you guys looking for a hat?
Well, no. Just a cart or carriage. Aela folded her arms.
Why is the cart important?
We found some tracks on the road. Looks like it was stopped for a while, then... The captain paused, running his hands through his hair. Look, I'd show you around, but we've lost the light.
That's fine. Just give us the details, and we'll find our way. You can get some rest while we have a look.
That does sound nice. Captain Bruce stroked his chin and thought for a moment, before motioning to his men. You two, stay here. Mind the horses, and watch the road. He took a couple steps before adding, and stick together.
Aye, sir,
said Clover. Rugat raised his hand.
Even to piss?
Even to piss. You want to keep that head of yours, don't you? The orc growled in that way of his kind. Don't you? Pressed the captain.
Fine.
Good, we'll be back. With that, the captain led the four companions up the path to the farmhouse. Aela eyed him as they went.
Keep that head?
Don't mind Rugat. Orcs are always looking for a good fight. Probably thinks the only reason he hasn't headbutted his way through a mountain is that no one's asked him to.
Yes. But keep that head?
You'll see. Farkus huffed.
Not seeing an orc guard out here.
Brew nodded. Yes, I bet you don't normally see anything but Nords wearing the sash back in the capital. But out here we get all kinds. Captain Fjorra tells me that there's an Altmer guard out in Rorikstead. Hamel raised his eyebrows.
A Balmor?
No, just an Altmer. I know that's rarer and rarer these days. Look here, the captain said, stopping just before the front porch of the two-story house. He pointed down at the trail. Rhea followed with the torch, revealing a blackened spill of dried blood. It had a few hard edges to it from where it had been cupped by a fallen body. Midland and Pasha were out here on patrol early this morning. They got curious when they saw the empty fields. Pasha thought they'd forgotten a holiday or something. Then Midland spotted this poor man from across the way. Fantus Lorius. Head held on by a strap of skin, thin as a bootstrap. Hamel sucked in air through his teeth.
Sword or axe? Shabby swing by the sound of it.
You would think so. When the news hit Pale Watch, we thought there was a Stormcloak raiding party, till we got here and found nothing had been taken. No friend. No slash, no chop. The captain made a semicircular motion at his throat. Ripped out. The lot of it. Nothing but air between his collar and chin. Rhea and Aela both gasped. Rhea at the shocking description, Aela to hide the deep, seeking breath as she tasted the air. Leather and dirt. Candle wax. Ink. Wheat, sweat, blood, shit. This was the farmer. Horsehair. An old mead stain behind the thigh of his trousers. Blood on his hands. This was the captain. Musky wolf and weathered steel. Farkus. Nothing smelled out of place.
I take it you moved the bodies?
Aye, it's been a grisly day of toil. The farmer, his wife and son. 6 laborers back near the bunkhouse. We tied them up in sacks, and we're going to take them back to Pale Watch for burying at the Garden of Archay. If we could get a cart down here, that is. They're all waiting in the barn. Our horses are hidden in there, too.
Where did you find the wife and child?
Inside. Follow me. The small group piled into the house, Farkus ducking to get through the entry. To the left were some bookshelves and a staircase to the second floor. To the right was a fireplace with a dining table and kitchen set up. There was even a modest stone oven fit into the wall. Straight ahead was the front door. It had been ripped right out of the frame and laid broken against the far shelves. Aela could still smell the yeast and the warm scent of many a baked delight. Apple pies, carrot cakes, quiche. The world had been deprived of a worker of little miracles. That leads to the pantry down below, the captain said, pointing to a latch on the floor. It's dead easy to spot, really, which is why we were surprised that nothing was touched. He turned towards the staircase. We found the mother on that landing. Aela followed his gaze.
Same type of wound?
No, she had a wooden post through her chest, and she was missing her right arm. Bruce stepped up to point out the extensive bloodstains splattered and smeared down the stairs. We found it up there, still gripping the son's shoulder. Kid was slit all up his left side, like something was really digging at him. As for the others, 3 of them are like Fantis. 2 of them are missing their heads entirely. One's throat was slit. Some of them had other wounds, others didn't. Some hardly had chests. 2 The captain faltered, bringing a hand to his temple. 2 we found all strung up by their own entrails. The house was quiet as the captain stepped shakily through the torchlight and slumped into a chair by the kitchen. Truth be told, I'm beyond glad to see you, because I'm not sure how to go about this. It doesn't seem like bandits, but it doesn't seem like rebels. Whatever did this feels joyful, reveling, monstrous. Aela read the toll taken by stress and revulsion in the hollowness of the man's eyes and the slump of his shoulders.
Have you eaten today, Captain?
I've tried. Aela looked up at the blood-stained stairwell, then over to Farkus. The tall, black-haired Nord was standing at the foot of the stairs, glaring resolutely at the wall. She followed his gaze and saw nothing of note.
One more question, if you would, Captain.
The tired guard nodded and seemed to gather himself once more. The tracks on the road?
Yes.
Right. The tracks seemed to come from the north. The cart was stopped near where we were waiting. We saw the indentations. It was loaded heavy. We found a broken post all greased up behind a fence near the road, guessing that was an axle. The laborers by the bunkhouse still had tools in their hands. My guess was the cart broke down, got repaired. Then...
Everyone died.
Seems so. Except whoever was driving the cart. The tracks continue south towards the capital. Hamel nodded.
Well, I reckon we better head south and track down this cart of yours.
My thoughts exactly, but we can't just leave everything here.
No, indeed.
Aela mused.
Besides, I want to have a look around. I suggest you return to your men and try to get some rest. We've brought enough supplies to make camp. Rhea, escort him back. Hamel, light a torch for us, then check the pantry, see if there's anything that can help them through the night. Farkus and I will snoop around the farm.
The captain rose sharply as if about to protest, his face flushed with embarrassment from his moment of weakness. Aela placed a hand on his shoulder.
Relax, Captain. You've done well. We'll take it from here. Fresh set of eyes and all of that.
After a moment's jaw-clenching, Brue relented. Very well, Lady Huntress. Once again, I thank you on behalf of the Whiterun Guard,
You know, it's strange.
said Rhea, squinting at the dark room.
If they rode off in a cart, they must be a who. But the way that you describe the wounds makes it feel more like a what.
Yeah,
Aela breathed.
but whoever or whatever they may be, remember who we are.
Rhea's apprehension faded to a smile. Hamel stepped forward.
Shouldn't we head south and spread the word?
To be on the lookout for a cart? Not much of a word. We need details.
I could go ahead.
Not in the dark, not alone. We ride at first light. Now, off with you.
Grumbling, Hamel relented and made for the pantry as instructed. The moment they were alone, Aela spun on Farkus.
What do you smell?
Fire.
Fire?
Or something like it. Right here, just a bit. About a day ago.
Are you sure it's not the fireplace? Or a candle?
No, it's different. And it's right here. Right here. Nowhere else.
Strange. Could be magic. See if you can pick up anything else. I'm heading upstairs.
The Wolf of Whiterun left the light of the torch behind her as she ascended to the second level. She heard the faint sucking sound as her boots stepped through the blood. Eyes adjusting to the dark, she reached the top landing and turned to her right, perceiving 3 doors making up the top floor. The first was open and led into a room with a wide bed, a mirror, a desk, a pair of wardrobes, and a window facing the front of the house. Jewelry gleamed in the low light. Green caught her eye on the nightstand, a delicate chain, and finely cut raindrop emerald. A lady's jewels. This was the parents' room. She breathed in deep and tasted perfume, books, lantern oil, cloth, and the stale scent of coupling. She checked the wall behind the door and the frame. She saw no mark where it had been slammed either open or shut. The marriage, it seemed, had been happy enough. She moved to the window and peered down at the patio. She saw the stain left by Avantus Laureus.
Were you watching?
She muttered to herself.
Did you see it?
She turned slowly to the door, sniffing once more. Fear. Fear and panic. She stepped into the hallway. The scent led to the left. As she followed, she found that it was mingled with something. She couldn't put her finger on it. Every time she did, it slipped away like an elusive memory. The moment she thought she had it, it faded to nothing. The iron of blood blended with the dark acre of ink as she turned into the next room. It held more books and a desk that looked out onto the farm. This was the father's office. From here he could see out over the golden acreage of his land. The room was untouched, and she quickly moved on.
Your son.
She breathed.
You must get to your son.
In the final room, she stepped over the site of a child's death. The tangy iron scent sang of a clean young body, unsullied by age, injury, or alcohol. The blood coated the floor with a dark sheen by a child-sized bed. She thought she could see the outline of one of the boy's legs in the drying pool. Upon inspection of the bed, she found that one corner post had been ripped off. She felt like she knew where it had ended up. A breeze tossed her hair, and she saw that the window had been smashed through. There were no shards inside. Something had broken out, not in. Stepping over to it, she peered out and saw an indiscernible pile of smashed and splintered wood. She looked around the room for some sign of missing furniture, but the dresser was still there, as well as the bed. She suddenly wished that she was more domestically minded, so that she could better make sense of this mess. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a pair of gloves on the dresser. She stepped over and picked up the scents of sweat and dirt, of toil and adrenaline. The boy had started helping his father with the farm. She was suddenly struck by the size of the gloves. The boy wasn't petite, he was growing, the size of an adolescent. She moved back to the pool of blood. Was this enough? Or had it not all drained? Who had done it? This was the site of a kill. Why couldn't she smell the perpetrator? She inhaled the carnage, searching for them, and her head swam. The glorious scent of fear, death, and viscera rolled into her mind like a fog. She felt the beast within her stir, and raise its grisly head, ears perked. The huntress staggered out of the room and leaned over the rail of the stairway. She was clutching her face and nose, willing against the rising bloodlust. She felt her teeth growing sharp and jagged and pushed against it.
The mother,
she thought.
Think of the mother.
She squinted back at the room through glowing eyes and pictured the scene.
Okay, you grabbed your son, but you were separated.
She muttered.
Separated at the elbow.
In a burst of energy, she jumped up onto the rail and threw her hands out, bridging against the high staircase wall. Running her fingers over the wood, she found what she was looking for. A smooth spot with ever so slightly splintered edges.
You hit your head here and fell. That's why you didn't run. And at some point, you were speared by that bedpost. And
the scent of the blood below was wafting up to her. She let herself drop to the stairs, landing easily and sitting down, head in hands, eyes screwed tight. Prey! The scent of prey! A growl began to rise in her throat. Pinewood, pain, ink, fear, paper, skin, wheat, love, vegetables, youth, sweat, cotton, flax, blood, 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 beyond, 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 and nothing, nothing, nothing. The thought rumbled in her mind like the breaking of the sky. She wasn't smelling nothing. The scent was nothing. It was absence. It was void, smooth and featureless as glass. It was...
Aela.
The huntress's head popped out of her hands, and she saw a pair of bright red eyes looming out of the shadows high above her.
Your eyes are red.
So are yours.
We should step outside.
Aela stood up and stretched her hips.
Yeah. We'll need to make the rounds of the farm, check the bunkhouses and the bodies.
You have any idea what did this?
Yep.
Aela said, brushing past him.
And I just hope I'm wrong.
All the boy could see was blue-black. Every now and then an amorphous presence drifted by, nothing but shadows in the dark. His clothes were chilled and chafed against his skin. Had the stars been out, he knew that he'd behold them through the fog of his breath, but now that vapor only further obscured the shifting gloom around him. With every unsure step he was moving slower. Trees that he thought were distant nearly cracked him in the nose. Potholes took the shape of stepping stones, and with every blink his eye made an enemy of his mind. Were those branches or crooked hands? Was that a burl in a trunk? Or a head peeking out at him? He recalled the story of Gloston and the beast. Tall as 5 horses it was. Flesh black as night, claws like scythes and antlers like trees forged from swords. Its voice was a scream straight out of oblivion, and stilled the heart just to hear it. It could toss us aside with a sweep of those long arms. He couldn't remember now how Gloston had dove to the side, took up a pike while the beast didn't see him, and speared it in the heart. He couldn't remember now how the day had been won, and the forest was made safe. All he could remember were the savage dimensions of the thing, the hate apparent in those vicious tools, its stalking steps through his restless dreams. A twig snapped to his left, and he jumped, scampering blindly to his right. A rustle of leaves sounded to his right, and he yelled and hurtled to the left. The sound of his own voice bounced back to him, stretched and hollow. As he ran, he thought he saw a light ahead, some sort of blue flame flickering. He hesitated, not knowing whether the light would bring an end to this nightmare. A wayward step and his foot slipped. He didn't fall immediately. Rather, he stumbled and took a flailing, unbalanced run headfirst into a tree. As he slumped in the dirt at the base of the trunk, dislodged leaves settled onto his shoulders like the weight of fear and shame. The forest was quiet, and maybe if he just lay still, it would stay that way. Somewhere, a cart or carriage was trundling along. Did it hold killers or monsters? Was it them or those or it? Aela had ridden in a carriage once when she was a child. She had been so excited by the novelty of it, but after only an hour's rumbling along, she found it wasn't to her taste. Everyone was packed in too close. She couldn't get any air. She remembered being uncomfortably warm, hating the canvas roof when rain fell, offering crisp relief. She squirmed and kicked and leaned out to touch the rain, vexing even her mother. Eventually, she sat in her mother's lap, looking out over her shoulder at the slow roll of the passing landscapes. She couldn't reach them or feel them, and her view was so painfully narrow. It was in this way, Aela thought, that she perceived time. The hours between the falling of the moons and the rising of the sun passed like those blurred vistas. Her eyes fluttered shut once or twice during the night, but no dreams came save the long meditations on the bloodied farm. The hours stretched and bled into each other like ink runs over wet parchment. But surrounded by such death, such a violent bouquet of smells, Aela's restless heart hadn't let her sleep a wink. She watched the time pass, minute after minute, until the sunbeams burst from the ground, casting away the last wisps of cloud like scattering rats, and the sleeping lumps around her began to stir. She stretched, languid as a rousing house cat, and earned satisfying pops from her back and shoulders. As she rolled her neck, she felt eyes on her. Glancing at the other bedrolls, she saw the guard named Clover, staring intrigued at the dirt near his elbow, a light color in his cheeks. He had done an admirable job tucking away his leering, but she had caught it all the same. She was used to it, both the attention and the bashful deference. Even those blind to the secret of Jorvaskr found it difficult to hold her gaze. Many people of Skyrim would be quick to attribute this aura to the heroic reputation of her and the companions. None of them guessed at the powerful predator walking among them, at someone who was both a who and a what. She stared at Clover for a long moment, waiting for him to chance a second look. When he did, he jumped at her attention and tried to pass his gaze smoothly over hers, as if he was merely sweeping his eyes across the horizon. This was fun. In any other circumstance, her face would be split with that beguiling grin, but today was to be a day of grim contemplation and duty to the hold. The wheat-covered hill was silent amid the waking of this sparse camp. Stomachs growled as a loaf of 2-day-old bread was passed around the group. Many of their eyes were bloodshot, having turned to Lorius' store of ale to find sleep the previous night. Captain Brew refused to eat at first, whether this was a result of queasiness from the bottle or noble martyrdom that others might have a greater share. Rhea huffed and crouched before him.
You're a good captain. Otherwise you wouldn't be out here,
she said quietly.
But you're no good to us like this. Eat, please.
Only then did Brew allow himself a meager breakfast. Aela smiled to herself. She liked Rhea. She was the new face around Jorvaskr before Stranger had turned up. Well-rounded and bright-eyed, every day she seemed overjoyed just to be there. Some in the companions were old soldiers and mercenaries. Some were thugs who found honor. Some were in it for fortune and glory. Some came from the fandom. Some just wanted a shield at their back. Some wanted to be the best and fight with the best. And some were born into the life and took it in stride. Then there were a few who seemed destined for this life, built for it, confident in every moment that there was nothing they'd rather be doing, and no one they'd rather be. Rhea, doubtless, was counted among these. Aela was fond of the kid, for she felt the same. It also helped to have a gentler soul around, someone kind and open with strangers. Had it been her, she would have just stuffed the bread into the captain's mouth. As camp was packed away and legs were burdened with their bearers, the companions led the way down to the farmhouse. And with the last of the drowsiness leaving the group, Brue turned to the huntress. "Well then, Aela, under the light of dawn, what illumination can you bring to these dim matters?" The wolf smiled at his turn of phrase, and crouched over the blackened bloodstain that marked the end of Ventus Glorious. Producing a water skin, she poured a substantial amount of water onto the dirt next to the stain. She cupped it with her hand so it didn't run away, and rather sunk into the ground.
All right. This is where Ventus died.
She took the dagger and scraped across the bloodstain.
Missing a neck, we can expect that he bled most of what he had to bleed. And yet,
She gestured to the dry dirt under the stain.
the ground beneath isn't discolored at all.
She scraped at the area she had just poured the water over.
Here, though, we can see that fluid can infiltrate deep into the soil, and yet it hasn't. Which means that this is more of a splatter than a spill, and we're dealing with much less blood than we might have thought.
She fixed the captain with her gaze.
So where did the blood go?
As she rose, she pointed to the crumpled mess that had once been furniture.
And I'm not sure what that was, but it was thrown from that window all the way down here, which, nothing against any present company, would require more strength than can be easily assumed.
Aela pointed off to the barn.
We checked the bodies last night, all torn up like you said, ripped at, not cut or hewn. But the child was missing heart and liver, both blood-rich with dark alchemical and arcane applications.
The yellow sashes exchanged dark looks as Aela turned back to them.
Captain Brue,
She began, adding weight to her words with a pause.
Last night Rhea said this felt like we were looking for a who and a what. I believe it's both in one. I believe that this was the work of vampires.
Vampires?
Clover burst.
Children's stories. Vampires don't exist.
Fool!
Cut in Rugat.
My cousin was slain by those fiends.
Ah, did the wounds look the same?
We never found him.
And that's no proof at all.
Quiet, Brue ordered, weariness gone from his face as he looked back at Aela. We've never had vampires here. I heard they generally stick to darker paths, out where there are caves and hollows and folk walk alone.
If you have a better explanation, then I bid you share it.
Aela held him under a withering eye.
Or accept that we have in fact found ourselves on darker paths.
Clover threw his hands up.
Captain, you can't honestly...
The shorter man silenced his subordinate with a glance. Clover dropped his eyes and paced away from the group, making sure to remain in earshot. Vampires, Brue said, contemplatively looking up at the dark farmhouse. Farkus folded his arms.
Creatures of malice and hunger.
Yeah, if the stories are to be believed.
Aela nodded.
They feed on the blood of their victims, possess unnatural strength, delight in slaughter, and would have no need for the stores of food or crops. I can't speak for them, but if blood is your diet, the rich heart and liver of a child untouched by age, alcohol, or disease could only be a delicacy.
Stendar's mercy, muttered Brue, covering his mouth. For all his skepticism, Clover was turning green where he stood. Rugat just sniffed and chewed on his tusks.
The only respite,
Aela said,
comes with the break of day. In all the tales I've heard, the fiends have no love for sunlight.
Rhea huffed.
Shame we can't weaponize the sun.
If what you say is true, Captain Brue began, then we must send word to the capital. An unknown carriage traveling by night.
We'll take the message south. You know the farm better, and you have reinforcements on the way. Wrap up the affairs here and see to the dead.
The captain nodded. We'll need to increase patrols around the towns at night. No sense protecting land. People are the focus of these monsters. This place will be empty till next of kin arrives.
Do you know the next of kin?
No, I don't. We'll have to dig through the study. Clover scratched his chin.
Vantus married a high elf. Next of kin might be hard to track down. We should probably gather any valuables we can find in case of looters.
We'll inform the priest of Arche as we pass through Pale Watch.
Aela said, offering a hand to the guard captain.
Rest assured that you have the support of Jorvaskr in this.
Brew took the hand gratefully. My thanks, Madam Huntress. With the companions on our side, I'm sure this will soon be little more than a very... He looked back to the bunkhouse. Very unpleasant memory. As the guards set about their preparations, the warriors stepped away. Rhea was the first to speak.
Have you ever crossed swords with vampires, Aela?
No.
The huntress said flatly. Rhea's face dropped.
Oh, Farkus, have you? Or your brother?
No.
Said the large man, eyes peering out sympathetically from under his mop of black hair. Rhea looked to Hamel, who only shook his head. After a moment of silence, Aela chuckled.
The companions are warriors of honor, the bane of brigands and beasts. I have hunted saber cats like rabbits, bandits flee at the sight of me, and giants quake at the sound of my name. But this is a prey that I have never been measured against.
Hamel crossed his arms.
So how do we fight them? Scratch that, how do we even find them?
Aela looked to Farkus. The previous night they had both been vexed by that strange scent that wasn't a scent. That void, as if someone had sponged the air. They had tried tracking it around the farm, but neither of them had much success.
We'll fight them,
She began.
with wit, guile, and tenacity. And we'll find them
She looked south.
with persistence.
Hamel frowned.
It's not much of a plan, is it?
Rhea shrugged.
We're heading back to Jorvaskr, right? Someone has to have crossed paths with vampires. What about Kodlak or Skewer?
Aela shook her head, frowning.
We could ask.
Why don't we consult the library?
I can't believe I'm saying this,
Growled Hamel.
but I agree. We shouldn't go in blind.
Aela shot him a challenging gaze.
Scared, Hamel?
Did you not see the bodies, O wise wolf of Whiterun?
Aela pursed her lips and cast her eyes about, as if scanning for ideas. Her gaze settled on the tall werewolf next to her.
Farkus, you've been awfully quiet. Anything knocking around up there?
The vigilance.
The group all turned to Farkus, surprise evident on their faces. He blinked at their curious looks.
The vigilance of Stendarr.
Who are they?
Asked Rhea. Hamel scoffed.
They're a cult that hunts down and exterminates other cults. Bit ironic, actually.
Close.
Said Aela, looking at Farkus pensively.
They're an order of fanatical priests of Stendarr. They're demon fighters. Daedra hunters, really. Honestly, this does seem more up their alley.
Bloody brilliant. Then where do we find them?
Farkus cleared his throat.
The Hall of the Vigilance is just north of here in the Pale. Vilkas and I passed it a couple years ago on our way back from a job.
Aela lightly boxed his shoulder.
Yeah, just north of here, my ass. It's almost a week's ride.
5 days.
Whatever, Stonehead. That's not the point. We don't have time.
Some of them are nomadic. We might get lucky and run into one.
And then what? It's not like we can ask them for help anyway.
Rhea raised a finger.
Wait, why not?
Aela rapped her knuckles on Farkus's broad chest.
Let's just say they wouldn't take kindly to the nature of our presence.
Rawr.
Farkus offered helpfully.
Exactly. And let's not forget that this carriage of ours was headed south. Every day we spend gathering intel, it moves farther away.
Hamel threw up his hands.
So we stake out the towns and guard posts. As long as we protect the people, we just let them pass through quietly. If there's another attack, we'll be ready to respond.
No!
Aela's eyes flashed red.
We're not passing this problem off. We have to find the carriage. We'll alert Jorvaskr and inquire where we can. Then we spread out in pairs and cover the roads looking for the carriage. We need to cover the west out to Greymore, the east out to Valtime Towers, south up to Riverwood, and... Fuck.
With that hollow expletive, the Huntress's diatribe came to an odd and abrupt end. A pained expression on her face, she pinched her brow.
What is it?
Asked Rhea. Aela gave a long, slow sigh.
I know someone who's dealt with vampires before.
Nufic awoke to a gray day. The sun had rent the clouds above, but the bleak falls peaks and the throat of the world would not relinquish their shrouds so easily. Fingers of cloud reached between the trees, and haze drifted up from the earth, lending the woods an eerie, threatening aura. The boy was reluctant to move from between the large tree roots where he'd spent the night, but thoughts of his worried mother spurred him into action. The pine needle bed crunched as he set off. At first, he moved without even checking his gear, haste driving him like a horse. Then the thought occurred that he was strangely fortunate. Sure, this had been a disaster, but now he potentially had a proper morning of hunting before him. If it casts a shadow, it has a bright side. It was a long walk back to town. He was sure to run into something. Finally, he checked his gear, drew an arrow, and notched it, keeping it ready as he continued home. The fog of the morning made navigation difficult, but knowing he was in a valley did a lot to aid him. Keep walking downhill. Eventually, he'll hit the White River and the rest would take care of itself. Trouble was, downhill wasn't always apparent. The land dipped and rose, gullied and plateaued. He tried to stop and listen for the rushing of water, but the fog seemed to dampen even the echoes of the ringing hills and cliffs. Eventually, he was forced to admit he had no idea where he was. Turning in the mist, he picked a direction and started walking. Eventually, some clue had to emerge. The bow in his hands had become an afterthought, when his fingers suddenly tensed on the string. Something had shifted ahead, a spindly shape in the gloom. At first he was frozen, breathless with fear. Then he wondered if it had simply been a low branch buffeted by a breeze. It moved again, and his anxiety turned all to thrill. Now that he had been looking for it, its shape became apparent. Those were the antlers of a male deer. Salvation. That was what he saw. For his ego, at least, if not for him. This would be his prize, his explanation for his unplanned absence. The deer was about 30 yards away, half hidden by a great cedar. He crouched low and crept left to further bring his prey into his sight. Then something happened that the boy was wholly unprepared for. The deer twitched, seeming to pick up that he was near. This was troubling, but not terrible. He was still well within range for his well-practiced bow. What immediately caused the boy's blood to run cold was the animal's response. It gathered itself and stood up on 2 long legs, bony antlers over wicked brow, and a shaggy mantle of black. Whispers of oblivion clawed at his mind as the beast of Bleak Falls Barrow, risen anew, started stalking through the haze towards him. He flew, shallow breaths rapid as his thrumming heart, feet skipping over the ground, light as a cricket skipping over grass. Direction stopped having any meaning. The nightmare had come to life. He came to a rise, ascended it in a sprint, and, legs heavy, bounded down the other side. Chancing a glance behind him, he saw, cresting the hill, that bent horned crown borne by long willowy limbs. Shadowy spindles protruded from its sides, making it seem almost spider-like as it approached. He veered right and tried to lose it in a bramble, only to find its looming silhouette waiting for him on the other side. Some voice called to him, an intrusive coercion telling him to stop. He wouldn't listen. He leapt into a tree, his young wiry frame lifting itself with ease, and began to traverse the boughs, tight-roping from limb to low limb. It hadn't occurred to him that this was a plan contingent on a frightful amount of luck. And while he didn't lose his balance and tumble out of the understory, he very quickly ran out of helpfully placed branches. Nufic dropped back to the forest floor and was immediately aware of movement to his right. As he ran, out of the gloom came a rock wall. Nowhere to go, he took the stone in hand and began to climb. "Stop!" The voice echoed off the stone and rang out through the forest. It was tangible, a voice bound by Nirn, and it stopped the boy in his tracks. "In the name of Kinnereth, the North Wind, and the fire in my fucking legs, will you stop?" Nufic turned and gaped down at the figure looking up at him from the wooded floor. It was a man. Dirty and ragged, short hair shaved on the sides. He wore a dirt-colored tunic, a padded shirt of steel mail, And what the boy had taken for the spindly protrusions of some aberration were actually the many-leaved branches the man had stuck into his clothing. He carried a bow on his back, and the boy could now see clearly that draped around the man's shoulders was a dead deer, its antlered head lolled off to the side. "Sky's above, kid! What are you running for? Do you want me to break my back trying to catch up with you? Because hauling this poor guy around is one thing, but I'm not climbing that. No way in Nern." Nufic blinked awkwardly and tried to ignore the soreness growing in his extremities as he clung to the rock.
Who are you?
"You know, I can see your legs shaking. You might want to come down."
I can't just jump down. I'm too high.
"I know it feels like it, but your feet are no higher than your head would be. Just let yourself drop."
Why should I trust you?
"By the time I explain anything, you'll have lost your grip anyway. Just drop." Nufic gritted his teeth, but he knew the odd man was right. He swallowed his pride, prepared for battle, and let go of the rock with a little kick. Stone rushed past and earth rose to meet him. To his surprise, he felt a pair of hands half catch him under the armpits so he didn't buckle when he hit the ground. Thrashing and grunting, he fought out of the grip and wheeled on the man, hands up, ready to do something.
One more time, who are you?
The strange man gave a bemused, crooked smile. This close, he could see that one side of the man's head wasn't shaven, but rather bald and covered in faded scars. He smelled of smoke, the woods, and the assorted morbid confessions of the deer on his back. "Me? I'm nobody. As for why you would trust me, I haven't the slightest idea. The real question is, why did you run from me? Are you a scout?" The boy blinked quizzically.
A scout?
"Ember shed mine," the man said. The words held a question, an accusation, and a challenge. Nufic's face must have been sufficiently blank, for after a moment the man relaxed. "That's a no, then." He stepped away, leaning on his hip and adjusting his pack along with the weight of the carrion. "So why did you run?" Nufic swallowed, trying to comprehend his own emotional whiplash. In a matter of minutes he had gone from ashamed to hopeful to terrified and now embarrassed. The words of his mother floated through his mind.
Telling lies is great and all. It's remembering which lies you told that's the hard part. My advice, young one, just tell the truth. Save the headspace for something really important.
He cleared his throat.
I was scared. I thought you looked like the beast of Bleak Falls Barrow.
The man's dark eyes watched him for a moment, scanning for a lie. Then he barked out a laugh and started chuckling. "Me, the beast!"
Of Bleak Falls Barrow, yes.
Nufic pursed his lips and tried to grin through the man's impending ridicule. "You thought I was..." The stranger's tanned face reddened with mad laughter. "Hey! Hey! You hear that?" he said, suddenly looking left into a stand of trees. "This kid thought I was the beast." Nufic started and wheeled on the trees, expecting some bandit ambush, only to see pale gloom and cluttered forest. The odd man looked over his shoulder at the deer. "I mean, yeah, I guess I see it. Bloody antlers and all," he said, as if in response to someone. Then he turned back to the boy. "The beast of the barrow, eh? Slain by brave Gloston of the Whiterun Guard. That makes you from Riverwood, then. What are you doing out here?"
I was hunting.
"Oh yeah? You get anything good?"
Who were you? No, I haven't caught a thing. I was trying to get back home last night, but the moons weren't out and...
"Last night?" the man said, aghast. "Son, where do you think you are?"
I'm below the barrow, in the hills up above Hag's End.
"Oh, no, you are way off. You are way further south than you think. The mouth of Lake Ilanalta is only about a mile that way," he said, pointing. Nufic blanched as he realized just how lost he was.
That's not...
"Do you have a map?"
Yeah, of course I have a map. I just couldn't see anything because of the fog.
"Yeah, it does that," he said, looking back to that distant spot in the trees. After a moment, he called out again as if addressing someone else. "He's not one of yours, he's just lost. I'm taking him back to Riverwood." The boy scanned the trees and held his breath, straining his ears, but still he heard no response.
Sir, Who are you talking to?
Don't worry about it. The man side-mouthed before calling. Yeah, well, you know me. I'll let you know if I see any. Another pause, more empty silence. The man placed his brown-wrapped hands on his hips. Yeah, I'll be back as soon as I can. He started walking back the way they'd come, but faltered and turned once more. As soon as I can. I don't know what'll happen any more than you do. Finally continuing, he called over his shoulder. You're smart. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Stay weird. Ta-da. Nufic stood, stunned for a moment as the man moved off, fading into the haze. Then, heart leaping in his chest, he hastily followed. The fog somehow felt like it was creeping closer the farther the man got.
Sir, what was all that?
Call it housekeeping, he said, eyes focused ahead.
You live out here?
Never said it was my house.
But then...
I will say no more, for your sake as much as mine.
Oh, okay.
Nufic panted, trying to keep up with the man's long strides.
Were you hunting out here too?
A bit, the man offered unhelpfully. Nufic pressed.
Where did you get the deer?
A herd of females have been grazing out by the old sunken fort on the lake. Found this guy orbiting them. Waiting for Rut, I thought him.
Poor bloke.
The odd man stepped up on a fallen log and took a moment to scan the fog before continuing. Indeed. He cocked his ear then, as if hearing a sudden sound. The motion was so sharp the boy jumped, only to realize a moment later he had heard nothing.
You know, if you can lead me to the river, I'm sure I could find my way.
Oh yeah, the man nodded. You look very buoyant. Nufic paused, trying to unpack the meaning of that. He recalled one of the few times he had seen the West Bank this far south. High cliffs and crags of rock hanging over roaring rapids. After considering the fog and the many miles by which he had misnavigated, he grimaced and ran to catch up.
Although,
he panted,
I suppose I could stick with you. I'm curious how you can find your way in this fog when I couldn't.
The Raggedy Man placed a hand on a tree trunk, and the boy saw that it was missing the pointer finger. Seeming to take some sign from the bark, he turned slightly right. I wish I could tell you there was some trick to it beyond the obvious, but truth is, it just comes down to knowing.
You're out here a lot then?
Lately.
Are you a ranger?
A what?
A ranger. A mist walker. A wayfarer of kine. My mother used to tell stories about them. Folk who could feel where rivers ran under rock and crossed great distances without tiring. They heard kine's breath on the wind and acted as sentinels over the wilds.
You make it sound so grand.
So you are.
I've just seen a lot. There's little more to it.
Did you see what happened back then with the beast?
Hey, listen, the man said, pivoting abruptly to face the boy. Nufic jumped, thinking he'd struck some nerve, but he saw no rage in the man's dark eyes. I'll get you back home safe and sound, but I've got one last little errand to run on the way. It shouldn't take too long.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
The man nodded and kept walking.
Just how long have you been out here?
I have no idea how to answer that question.
Well, what do I call you, stranger?
Hmm?
I figure if we'll be traveling together, we ought to know each other's names at least. I'm Nufic.
Well, Nufic, I don't know why you're asking my name. He glanced back, flashing that crooked grin again. You clearly already know it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Skyrim audio adventure. I'm a bit under the weather right now, but I'm glad I was able to get this edited and out, so... Big announcement, I was going to do a whole video on this, but the Skyrim audio adventure is now available on Spotify, at least the first season of it. So you no longer have to keep YouTube open just to listen to this. I'll include the link in the description. We have some returning names in the cast. Aela was played by Loveland. Patrick McCook was Codlack in the last chapter, and now he is Rugat. And Jorden Bates, in lieu of the untimely end of Vantis Lorius, has taken up the role of Farkus. Some new names now. Tim Winters as Clover. Naomi Melville as Rhea. Brennan Blotner as Hamel, Riley Starr McLean as Fjorra, Nufic's mother, Katelyn McCann as Galia, and finally Ryan Hughes as Nufic. The character outline for Nufic was sent in by Matt Marlin on Discord. If you have a character that you'd like to see in the show, then let me know and I'll see if I have a spot for them. Really glad I got this out. I know it's like the first one is always the hardest, but I don't really think so. I think that the second one is harder because at that point you're starting to set your pace and you're starting to create a standard that you need to uphold going forward. And so we'll see if I can do that. I hope I can. But this was fun, and here's to more to come. And once again, thanks for listening.